Oh, hold on. Going live. Now I see it.
Here we go. Okay, fantastic. Sorry about that for those watching other platforms. Okay.
Oh, hold on.
It's weird.
Going live. Now I see it. Okay, cool.
We're live.
Yep.
Voice. Hey, okay, we're live. Hey, Jan. Okay, now that we finally sorted this out, I think people will be. Oh, cheers, Rob is not here to not drag me. People will be a little bit delayed. Probably watching about 2 minutes of us trying to figure out how the hell the streaming thing works. That's good. Yeah, so welcome everyone. We decided to do this in the US time zone just for Corey. This is exclusively a live stream for Corey to drag us and tell us to right our ways, shall we say. So, yeah, 2 weeks in. Yeah, 2 weeks into reInvent. I was just talking earlier how I've actually quite enjoyed your live tweets of the various sessions. You've managed to cover a lot of sessions that I haven't gotten to, and I've had a lot of like envy, thinking, oh bugger, I should have gone to that, or like that's a great one. And I've caught up with some of those sessions after the fact. What are your overall thoughts on reInvent so far? Like your overall impression? Like it's virtual now, it's not in person. What are your thoughts up till now?
Yeah, I think it's been a bit weird, right? Because usually it's all done in a week. There's a lot more, I guess, excitement, well, condensed into 1 week. Whereas now it's kind of dragging into 3 weeks, and it's kind of hard to, I guess, put yourself into that bubble for 3 weeks and not work and try to keep up with all the sessions and stuff. And I don't know. I think that a lot of the announcements this year happened before reInvent. Certainly, some of the big announcements are not. I guess that's not been as many of them this year. Some of the big ones are Lambda related. You've got the new 10 gig functions with 6 CPU core. You've got container image support, which is quite a big one. But I think that can also be quite confusing to a lot of people. Because now you got containers running in Lambda. What does that mean? Does that mean that you are running long-running services, and when should you use it? I think there's going to be more and more questions about all these different things they're adding to Lambda, which I don't know. I think on the one hand, I think it's great. They're covering more and more just more edge cases, but at the same time, Lambda itself seems more and more complex now. There's a lot of options that is not applicable to everyone, and it's going to take longer to explain which service, which feature to you should you actually be using, and when should you be using them.
Yeah, that's actually quite true. Like, actually, I watched Forrest and Corey's live stream last night, and actually one of the main things Forrest talked about is how Lambda went from being this really simple thing to this incredibly complex thing. And it can be intimidating to people. Like, I think completely understand why it's become more complex. They want to remove all the barriers to people adopting it, but with every new feature they add and every new capability, they add that little bit of complexity, which is quite interesting. How do you think the Lambda team and maybe the AWS as a whole can potentially fight that complexity? Because it's a double-edged sword, it's balance.
Yeah. I guess sometimes I think about it in terms of games like World of Warcraft. Until you reach a certain level, you don't have all the controls. You have some of the options just hidden in the UI so that you don't see them.
Yeah.
I think there may be something like that whereby you have additional advanced settings that you're just not applicable for most people. Rather than you clutter everyone with all these different options, you have to unlock them somehow. Maybe there's a case of you have to use it for something first, and then based on your usage, or maybe you have to click a button on the screen somewhere to say show me the more advanced settings. Because certainly there's so much things there now, it's kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, it's massive. Like, I remember when Lambda first came out, like I was able to pick it up in a day because there wasn't much to it. It's you uploaded your code and it kind of worked. And you only had, I think, like 5 or 6 event sources, and off you went. It was pretty easy. Not many configuration options. You could have a couple sizes, a few event sources. That's it. No concurrency controls. No, I think 2 or 3 languages. It was pretty simple. So out of the Lambda announcements, which ones are are the ones do you think are going to have the biggest impact?
I think
the
the one
ones that
that's
people are going to use fast.
I think that the one that everyone's going to use, even without explicitly using it, is the per millisecond billing. I think that's actually great. That's pretty amazing that you get that now out of the box. I guess my main concern is just now, like before, you can tell people don't bother micro optimizing because you don't get anything when you are sub 100 millisecond averaging duration. But now you could optimize your code to nth degree and save yourself 20 millisecond on each invocation, and that has a cost impact. But a lot of developers love to optimize things just because it feels good.
Yeah.
But there's a cost associated with that, and that cost is often much more expensive than what you save in the AWS billing because the engineering time is so much more expensive than anything else. So if you spend like a month working on something to save 10 milliseconds per invocation, you're going to need a lot of invocations in that month to be able to justify that engineering time. So that's kind of my concern. But other than that, I think the higher CPU, higher memory, that's a really useful one for a lot of folks doing machine learning stuff. I was talking to, and maybe the AVX2 instruction set as well. I was talking to Denise Bauer from the CSIRO in Australia on my podcast just before reInvent, and she was talking about how they were using Lambda to do all this HPC stuff, like and analyzing genome sequence for COVID-19 viruses, different strains. And she was talking about how they run into all these limitations around memory because those genome segments are really big, and they needed more memory, but also more CPU, and having that 10 gig option and the most 6-core CPU plus being able to use the AVX2 instruction set. I think that's going to be really useful for the guys that are doing that kind of machine learning stuff or just any sort of high memory, high CPU workload.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think some of these announcements, they're not for everyone who uses Lambda. They're for a very specific subset of folks. The improved compute, the amount of compute plus the extended instruction set is definitely going to people doing those kind of workloads. Not necessarily serving websites. They're going to be. It's not API workloads. It's that kind of big data science type workloads that are going to get the most benefit out of that. Talking on that, containers. So how do you think people are going to misuse and abuse the container support?
I don't know. I'm waiting to see. I guess they're gonna get a lot of people trying to run everything in containers because we're familiar with that already. Even though there's a much easier path there to work with working with Lambda using just zip files and uploads the zip file and then off you go. I think now it's I have really strong mixed feelings about that. It's definitely not something that I would do for any of my workload unless there's a really specific reason. But I was talking to who was it? I think it was Ken Collins. He seems to be a really big fan of this because the PHP runtime is just not as well supported through the custom runtimes, and maybe for that, containers maybe is a better way to do that. I'm not sure. I don't really use I don't use PHP, so it's hard for me to say to see how bad those custom runtime is.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. On the PHP side, if you're Laravel developer, which is PHP framework, there's a thing called Vapor, which essentially is a management overlay and interface for Lambda to run Laravel apps. And it's a company, Fathom Analytics, who do a privacy-aware analytics and tracking software, GDPR aware, so you don't have to have a cookie banner because they properly obfuscate the user. They use Vapor, which is serverless Laravel, and they got hit by a DDoS attack, I think, end of August. They wrote a really good blog post about it. But because they're developers and weren't experienced with dealing with DDoS, so their immediate answer was just increase the concurrency limit on Lambda, and they were hit 800,000 concurrent Lambdas, which each of the Lambda was taking under 100 milliseconds, so they were getting about 8 million concurrent sessions in PHP, which I thought was pretty impressive. Not really the right way to deal with things, and they did get AWS's DDoS protection turned on once they started talking about it, and people came out and helped them out. But I was quite impressed with, like, wow, PHP can scale on Lambda, but that's very specific using Vapor, which is optimized for service workloads. Whereas containers, you don't necessarily have to have that specific optimization to use it.
Yeah, well, we're reading that post. They eventually had loads of custom, I guess, validation they added to be able to block bad actors quickly, identify them quickly, and also block them quickly as well, aggressively. And I think that was some of the things that another client of mine was asking about, because they are also in a market where they often get DDoS by competitors. So I asked them to talk to get the AWS Shield Advanced potentially, and so that they can get access to the DDoS response team, which sounds like was really helpful for the Fathom guys, because they got a lot of advice on how to deal with that.
DDoS is one of those things that, like, if you look at the price of it, you think, oh, it's really expensive until you need it. And then it's like, oh, wow, actually, this is really cheap. We get great value for this because, for $3,000 a month, our business is still running, which is awesome. Okay, let's get back to reInvent. So, obviously, there's been containers, the increased containers, increased Lambda size. What are some of the other big announcements that were serverless related? But nice thing you saw on the Lambda team came out of the database teams, particularly Aurora Serverless V2. What are your thoughts on, like, Aurora Serverless V2? Because V1 wasn't quite serverless, it had these step changes. Now that's kind of gone.
Yeah, so from the stuff I've seen so far, it looks really impressive. Certainly from an engineering perspective, how they're able to do that almost instant scaling and very granular scaling as well. Whereas before you're doubling in the capacity every single time, and it takes a few seconds. Now it's instant, and also is in the increments in the 0.5 ACU. So from some of the engineering side of things is really impressive. And there was a section, I think it was this week, I forgot the ID, I can find out, on a deep dive on the serverless, Aurora Serverless V2. So that's a really good session to catch if you didn't. It's gonna be, I guess, on demand tonight, US time, I think. They're gonna make it available.
They'll be available in the next. They might be available now even, but pretty soon if they're not available already.
So V2 looks really very promising. You still have that cold start for a few seconds by the sound of it. So it's at least that's still a concern, which means that if you want to use it in production, it's not really going to be scale. It's not really serverless in the sense that it doesn't scale to zero unless you're happy to tolerate your Lambda function cold starting and then followed by your database cold starting for even longer, which is probably not ideal for most people in production. And I think the ACUs are more expensive, but the argument is that you would have less wasted ACU, because before you have to, I guess, scale up in the double in terms of ACU, and it takes longer to scale down. So now you have much tighter fit for your actual traffic. So you might end up being cheaper on the V2 compared to V1. I guess that's something similar to DynamoDB's auto scaling versus on demand. Auto scaling jumps up in bigger steps and takes longer to react, whereas on demand is kind of it's on demand, and it's more expensive per unit. But if you look at most people's workload, it probably end up being cheaper just because you have a much tighter fit for your actual usage.
Yeah. So, do you think folks with Aurora Serverless V2 becoming more serverless, for the last few years, a lot of people have been going towards DynamoDB as a database of choice for their serverless workloads. Do you see a lot more people who are comfortable with relational database workloads just saying, like, well, it might be a little bit more expensive, but I don't need to learn anything else. I can just do with this. and use it like a regular database. I don't need to learn single table design or any of that nonsense. Do you see, a lot of folks maybe not going the DynamoDB route because of this now?
Possibly, but I guess for that to happen, we need to first wait for data API to be supported on the V2, which is not right now because it's in preview. But I'm guessing once it comes out of preview and going to GA, it will be supported, and that would certainly make it a lot easier for people to still use the relational databases from the Lambda functions without worrying about managing socket connections and stuff like that. But yeah, I do think it would open up, I guess, maybe more use cases for folks, just because there's a lot to learn, and working with all these different clients, you see the struggle. Learning Lambda is a paradigm shift. Learning NoSQL databases is also another paradigm shift, and then a lot of them are coming from monolith to now starting building all these event-driven applications. That's another paradigm shift. So you stack all of them together, it becomes a really easy to fail. And certainly when they fail, it's not they're going to blame something. So, and also I think with DynamoDB, I'm not a fan of single table design. There's so many arguments with people online about that, and certainly I don't think you need to go down the route of a single table design to use DynamoDB, but DynamoDB itself is still quite restrictive, and it takes a lot of work to get to the point where you're proficient with it, from a modeling point of view. So having that easy, having it something that people can move some of the compute and application layer to Lambda, but then still keep using a relational database that they're familiar with, I think that would be really useful, at least an easier way in for people to adopt a more serverless mindset.
Yeah, I think they'll definitely open up that barrier. I kind of agree with you to a certain extent in single table design, but I think single table design is one of those things, like you said earlier, you're talking about micro optimizations that engineers love to do. It's like, I've said in the Rick Houlihan sessions, I'm sure you have as well, and it's this fire hose of information. It's like, wow, this sounds awesome. And you want to do this thing because it sounds, you're going to get the most efficient database. It's super cool. Yeah, super cool. I really need to get out more. But yeah, but it's a micro optimization. It's the kind of thing that if you've only got a few thousand records and you don't have a big system, you're not going to get huge amounts of benefits from it. Even then, like not even a few thousand, a few 100,000, you're not going to get big benefits. Rick talks about the numbers, and he talks about like Amazon's numbers, and they get gigantic benefits from that. But like if you are definitely building a brand new application, and you don't fully understand your access patterns, and you're still experimenting, you're still trying to figure out who your market is, never mind, how to optimize your database, absolutely don't touch it. You're going to add complexity you don't need. It's an efficiency gain you do when you are massive and you're spending, 6-7 figures with Amazon, and you want to spend, slightly less. And the engineering time is worth it. I think that's my attitude towards single table design. You can save you loads of money. If you're huge, do it. But if you're small, nah.
And also those modeling techniques that they can still be used without forcing yourself into a single table anyway. I use the same techniques, not necessarily for I guess efficiency, but more for just convenience sometimes. But I definitely don't force myself to just using one table. I use the techniques where it makes sense, and the number of tables is irrelevant. So I think this is the whole pushing yourself to just one table is forcing the issue, and like I said, just a lot more complexity, and most of the time it doesn't pay for itself. And I don't know. I see people have to explain really hard how the database schema works. And then you've got all this ridiculous number of global secondary index, and just
all the GSRs.
And it's all GSR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so you need to have a documentation to explain how your model works and how your index patterns is mapped to your database schema. And I think if something's difficult to explain, it's probably a bad idea to begin with. And I think that's certainly true for a lot of the examples I've seen. But yeah, not a fan of single table designs. Well, not the techniques. The techniques are great. It's just that this whole philosophy of minimize the number of tables as much as you can and force yourself into having just one.
Yeah, that's I do agree with you. I think the big things I take away from like Recueland sessions is not so much single table design. I understand why it's great, but it's how DynamoDB works. So a simple example, I always used to use wide documents in DynamoDB. Put everything in one fat document, and Rick was like, don't do that. Because you read that document, you only need 2 or 3 fields from that. You're going to read the entire thing. That's going to cost you more request units than if you had a small document. So try and break up your documents into smaller logical chunks. Same with updating it and that kind of thing. So there's definite benefit in attending those sessions, but try not to be too afraid. Try not to be too gung ho with going single table design, because you can paint yourself into a corner. So I think that kind of brings me to one of the other announcements, which was not a feature, not a product, but an improvement of S3, was the read after write. I've got some kind of strong thoughts about that. I think that's a fantastic thing. What are your thoughts about it?
I think it's great. So I guess for context, they've always had read after write consistency for new object creations. But when you update something, that's the whole that's where it kind of falls apart a bit. I was talking to Goiko actually a while back. So for my map, he is using S3 for everything. He's got a client talking to S3 directly, and one of the biggest problems he's run into is this the lack of read after write consistency on S3, and he's observed up to something like 10 or 20 seconds of delay sometimes for eventual consistency. So I think this is big news for him, and certainly I've had a few cases in the past where I've had to do some additional work just to make sure that when I update something in S3 and I try to read it right away, I can detect when the version is not quite catch up yet. I had to separate the metadata table to and then check, what I read, is that the latest version, and if it's not, then I will have to wait and then poll again, essentially. So this kind of just eliminates all of that.
Yeah, exactly. I think because S3 is the bedrock of cloud-based data lakes, whether it's lake formation or something you've done yourself. People typically, it's metadata in Dynamo and then your actual data in S3. So if you're updating the data regularly, you do want to have some level of consistency on that. So definitely, I think, you definitely see with like something like Health Lake getting announced. Was it Health Lake? I think it was called, getting announced, and the improvements to lake formation. A lot of that stuff's probably enabled by the durability and integrity of that data is significantly improved by the improved consistency. So talking about simple things, Amplify. So they had a few announcements. What do you think? So we always complain about, we don't complain, but we've talked about how the complexity of the Lambda UI. I always feel like the Amplify team try to take away as many kind of knobs and buttons away from you as possible and try and make your life easier, which is a trade-off, because they're making decisions for you that sometimes maybe you don't agree, but I think a lot of users, it doesn't matter because their workflows don't matter. What do you think of the new admin UI? Because I think we've both had a look at it. What are your initial thoughts on it?
So I guess I'm still on the fence about Amplify. I've got a lot of mixed feelings about it. But on the admin UI side of things, I think they've done a really good job. I love the fact that you can just click a few buttons and then set up your model and then set up the relationships and then get deployment going. And also the fact that you have this built-in CMS that you can share with other people, so that you don't have to build that yourself. At least you just work on 2 projects. We've had to build that ourselves to support some CMS-like capabilities for our app. So having that out of the box is great. But I think that, I guess in general, Amplify still kind of worries me a lot, because you're automating a lot of things that you don't understand. And the reason why you're trying to automate things is because you don't want to learn about all the sort of complexities of AWS, which is understandable if you're a front-end focused team. But then automating things that you don't understand is often a recipe for disaster later on. because things are going to go wrong, and you're going to get stuck because you don't know how it works under the hood. And also, I was talking to some of the guys on the AWS Community Summit stream earlier, whereby I guess someone asked a question about what's the difference between using something like Amplify versus using like AWS service like IoT Core. And I think that the main difference is that with IoT Core, if something was to go wrong with some of the underlying moving pieces like EC2 instances, it's not something that you have to deal with. It's something that Amazon would manage for you and deal with. It's transparent to you. But with something like Amplify, because it still relies on the CloudFormation, if there's something wrong with how that CloudFormation template is generated, or if you try to update or insert to global security index, and CloudFormation says I can't do that, I can only do one index update at a time, then that is a problem that you have to solve, even though you are kind of missing that link between the layer you're working in and the layer where the problem actually happens. So I think that's kind of my worry with Amplify. But if you are already set on using Amplify for building a demo or POC or something like that, then I think admin UI is great.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget that, because we work on cutting edge solutions, and we work on often sometimes some quite big things or very event driven things. We can have hundreds, thousands of events. Well, in my case, tens of events. We work on these services. We kind of forget that there's a whole world out there who have lots of small apps that don't get thousands of users, that just have tens or hundreds of users. I think Amplify provides a solution for a lot of those folk who don't particularly want to become AWS experts. And also, I'm thinking of the new announcement, was it 2 days ago? Or it might have been yesterday. I've lost track of time. I don't even know what time it is anymore. But the Fargate support for Amplify. You see what they do there is they massively simplify deploying a container, serverless container, Fargate, which if you're running WordPress or Django or any of these kind of slightly older server-based web frameworks, it makes your life easier. If you need to run a stateful workload, you don't want to learn about VPCs, and you don't want to learn about load balancers and API gateways, that kind of thing. And you've just got this little app that has 20 users, and you just want to get it going. It provides a great, easy solution. I think the issue there is, what do escape hatches look like later? What happens if it's not maintained? I think the big issue I always have with containers is the container hygiene. So you deploy your container, and you've got all the dependencies in that. The dependency tree is significantly bigger than with functions. And how often does someone go out and redeploy that container and improve those dependencies? Node.js version or PHP version or Python version has a vulnerability. You've got this 20-user app that might be used by an accounting system, internal accounts team, and have sensitive data in. And when deployed, it was secure, but 2 years later, it's riddled with vulnerabilities. And you've got developers who aren't ops people, don't have that ops discipline. Next thing you know, they've got this container that has got a bunch of vulnerabilities and they're not aware of it. That's the danger with making something really easy. But the other hand is it gets you going a lot quicker. It's always that trade-off. And there are always people who are going to want either or the other, either or. It's a strange one. Yeah. So what other announcements have kind of got you excited, shall we say? What gets Jan excited?
There's also the AWS Glue Elastic Views. So that was a little bit confusing when it first came out in terms of what does it do. But I think we had that session with the Heroes program. They gave us a nice little, I guess, recap session. I think that really helped explain what the Elastic Views it does, and also what they where they want to take it, and just the simple thing of being able to take data from DynamoDB and then sync it to Elasticsearch without me having to write any custom code. I think that alone is already pretty good, because that's something that I've had to do 3 times in the last 6 months. And certainly is not one of those things that adds a lot of value. but it's something that you just have to do because that plumbing is missing right now. And you got the basic building blocks of the DynamoDB streams, the Lambda function, and the Elasticsearch cluster. But then you have to sort of connect the bits yourself. So having something that can just do it for you out of the box, I think that's gonna save me a lot of work in the future. The next time I need to do something like that.
Yeah, there's tons of folks who've been doing things. With functions coming off DynamoDB streams to populate another data source and that kind of thing. It is one of those where it's like, people could kind of replicate that functionality already today, but it took effort. So as you say, it's just going to save work. I just noticed we've had a few questions. First of all, Corey Quinn wants to put containers in Route 53 database records. I'm not 100% sure why he wants to do that. I think he calls it Kubernetes or something. So I think there's a question here just talking about what the expected cold starters with Lambda and containers. What are your expectations? Have you tried it out yet? I haven't. Does it add time?
So I tried a container running a function with a container when it was in beta, because as part of working with Lumigo is that we get involved with all these launches before they happen, so we can prepare blog posts and stuff like that and try it out and give them feedback. So I did that, but I haven't got around to actually benchmarking what the cold start time looks like. So I watched the session with AJ near the other day. And he talked about the new container image should have almost identical, I guess, cold start performance to zip files. So one of the things that happens is that when you upload a new version of your function with and package it with a container image, they do a bunch of optimization process behind the scenes before they make it available to run on the Lambda service or inside a Lambda worker. And as part of that, I guess they're doing some clever things to optimize it. Maybe turns your container image into the native format that they actually run on. Because Lambda doesn't use container, it uses AMIs and stuff. Maybe they're doing something there so that you don't have the usual boot time that's involved with Docker. One thing also though is that because they're optimizing something, they're generating a new artifact, and the optimized artifact is actually what gets run when your function is invoked. And if your function is idle for more than 14 days, they might reclaim the space that's used for storing that optimized payload, which means that the next time your function runs again, the first invocation is going to fail after being idle for 14 days because the optimized format or image or whatever has been garbage collected, which means that it takes a few seconds for it to be ready again. So there's like additional steps in that Lambda invocation lifecycle whereby they need to run this optimization every time you deploy, and if your function has been idle for a while, then have to do that again. So just some small caveats to think about. And there's also things like layers doesn't work with container image anymore. Couple of things like that, which actually I'm not sad about layers not being available in container images. I don't think people should be using layers nearly quite as much as they are already, but that's a whole separate thing.
So extensions was something that got announced just before reInvent. One of those great announcements just before reInvent. Now extensions and layers can work together, but a lot of people will start using extensions for the reasons they're using layers. I feel particularly all the monitoring and observability and tracing companies, they all were a lot were using layers to integrate their tooling, and now they can use extensions. Do you think maybe people will stop using layers so much? Maybe just use it for custom runtimes, or?
So it's a slightly different paradigm. So what a lot of people did was they used layers to ship their SDK. And so the customers still have to, at runtime, require SDK to wrap their functions and things like that. What extension allows you to do is, that means, but then from a vendor's point of view, that means that you still have to provide language-specific implementations of your SDK so that they can, so that the customer can use it in their Node.js or Python functions. So with extensions, because you can run a separate process side by side with the main Lambda runtime process, it means that you can do some of this stuff on the side. extensions still. So speaking as say a vendor, extension still doesn't let me do the one thing I really want to be able to do, which is collect everything that's happening. So all the different HTTP requests you're making or anything you're sending over sockets, I can monitor those, and then I want to report it to my backend so that I can show you this nice visualization of what your application is doing. However, I don't want to be adding to your invocation time. So you've got an API. I don't want to say add 100 milliseconds to your request time because I'm busy. I need time to send my data to my backend, which right now you still can't do with extensions because when you've got extension on a function, the whole invocation finishes when the function itself finishes and all the extension has said, yes, I'm ready to move on. So you can't send that stuff in the background. What you end up doing as a vendor in your sort of tooling is that, you have to collect the data, buffer them, and then at a later invocation, send the data to your backend after it's been batched potentially, which means you can't really do the real-time monitoring as well as you would like. But hopefully that would change in the future, whereby they make it possible for you to return from your functions code, and then for the extension to have another maybe 10, 50 milliseconds or whatever to then do some stuff in the background, so that you can have a more of the sort of agent or daemon model of doing stuff in the background that you have on traditional servers.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Extensions is brand new, so with feedback from people like yourself and the wider community out there, it was definitely. I assume it will be something that will definitely improve. And there are about 1 million Lambda monitoring companies, and they all will add their feedback. So let's see what other questions. Corey wants to run DNS. He's building a DNS service from first principles. You should definitely use a database for DNS. That's a good place to start. So in terms of sessions you've watched, like I said, I started off asking, talking about the great threads you've been doing about some of the sessions. Which sessions stand out for you? Which ones would you recommend for folks to watch?
Yeah, so the one I saw, I think the point stood out the most was the session about monitoring production services in AWS by David Yanasek, who is one of the principal engineers, and they talk a lot about things that I wish I learned years ago that it took me a long time to actually figure out that's something I should be doing. For example, what's a good one would be to separate the latency response time for success versus failure request. That's a really simple one, but you don't learn until you run into that a few times. Why is my response time so much so good, but then things are supposed to be wrong? What's happening? Then you realize failing requests are returned a lot quicker than the successful ones and things like that. There's another one which is pretty good if you are thinking about standardization in your company. That was by Mark Brooks. Is it Brooks or Brooker?
Mark Brooker, yeah.
Mark Brooker on how they do sort of standardization in AWS, in Amazon, where I think the takeaway was not quite what I expected. He basically said that at the end that the standardization should almost be a last resort, that it limits the creativity you can have as a company, and instead you should sort of establish principles and tenets, and then let people sort of work from there, rather than sort of set up all these standards that you have to sort of follow and so from the title, it's not quite what I expected to hear, but it totally makes a lot of sense, and that's what they do within the Amazon as well.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. It's I was going to say something about AWS Proton. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But yeah, in terms of like whether you have strict rules versus tenets and principles that you live to, like a really good analogy I always find of that. I'm South African, so apparently we play rugby in South Africa, and our big rivals are the All Blacks in New Zealand. And the way South Africa plays rugby is in a very strict, traditionally, there's always been with a strict methodology. Like you play the way the coach says. If you don't kick when he tells you to kick, if you don't, follow his rules, you're out. Whereas New Zealand tend to follow, like, they have a style and a way of playing, but they don't have a strict game plan. In New Zealand, up until last year, probably been the best team in world rugby. And I think South Africa's kind of got back there by taking more of an approach of, adopting a philosophy rather than a strict set of rules. And that goes from team sport to, anything where you're working in teams and large organizations. I think that's a pretty important thing. Having that strong set of tenets and a strong philosophy is pretty important. The reason I joke about Proton is AWS Proton tries to do the opposite. It tries to set a strict set of templates and environments and tries to define what teams can do in a very strict kind of way, and then pushes those out to the feature team. So your platform team defines what the feature teams can do. Here's our templates, off you go. Whereas I kind of believe it's great to have a set of high level standards, but they shouldn't be rules. They're more guides than this is the way we do things. I don't know. What are your thoughts on kind of the way Protons come out? I think for me, it's one of the services that probably needed a bit more feedback before they launched it.
Yeah, it's super confusing, and I think part of that is because it's designed for very, very narrow, I guess, a list of companies who have that use case. I think when the Proton team sort of talked to us in one of those recap sessions we had, it was clear that they designed this thing for companies that are so big that they have a release team that looks after all the pipeline. There's a lot of strict requirements that need to be met, and there's in fact they're so strict and so hard to actually achieve that a lot of that burden falls onto the release team to actually make it happen. So I think for those companies, it's probably better than what they've done in-house. And so Proton, once it's more sort of flashed out, it's probably a good solution for those companies. But it's definitely not for most companies who aren't at that size or have that requirement that they need to have so much standardization and governance on the CI pipeline. And certainly none of the companies I've worked for in the past had a functional release team. I worked in the banks in the past where we do have release teams, but they were rather of the dysfunctional type.
No, we should all just adopt RTIL and have our change approval boards, and take a month to get stuff approved, get a 5-minute change approved, because that's definitely a far more effective way of getting things done.
Hey man, don't knock it. We used to get the whole month of December off because it's change freeze.
Change freeze is the way forward, I remember once we're doing a server migration. This is back in the day when I used to work as a DBA, and we were doing a server migration, just upgrading servers, and it was like a month-long project. And we'd had our kickoff meeting with the project manager and the development team and ops teams, the DBA team, and all of that. We all, 10 of us got in a room. And 2 days afterwards, the server we were migrating off had an outage, and thankfully the new server was physically in place, and we migrated in 4 hours. And then the next day, the project manager was like, "Well, that's the project done." It's sometimes process for the sake of process isn't helpful. I think that the Proton team have been potentially done a disservice by Andy Jassy. He probably gave a 2-liner, and now we're releasing this tool to deploy containers and Lambda functions, AWS Proton, and that was about it. So everyone read the interpretation. I know I definitely did. I was very upset with it. It's what is this thing? I definitely think Andy Jassy potentially did them a disservice. But it's really hard for him. How else would he have described this thing to get people to fully understand without spending 5 minutes on it, and putting the audience to sleep? I don't know.
Yeah. I think like you, when I heard it, I just thought, wait, another thing to do, another deployment framework or tool to do deployment for Lambda is. How is this going to be different from CDK, SAM, all this other stuff you already have, code build and code pipeline, I think they only after that chat with the Proton team, I think it made a bit more sense in terms of what this service is for, and I don't know, given it's targeted at such a small segment of customers, should they have even included it in Andy Jassy's keynote? I'm not sure. I guess it's a new service.
No, it's another one. I think I did a series of blog posts before we even talking about some of my favorite announcements, and AWS AppSync was one of my favorite announcements. And it was never in Andy Jassy's keynote. It was announced on Twitch, on the reInvent floor. It's like, it's such a huge service now. I know you've done amazing work with it. It's made you significantly more productive, and more people are adopting it because it's the premier managed GraphQL service out there. And like, that never made Andy Jassy's keynote. It's just, I think we should probably learn, if something is in Andy Jassy's keynote, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have a big impact on our life. Yeah.
Well, there's still a Vernon's keynote next week, so I'm excited to see what else they've left up in their sleeves. I think Ed Lim kind of hinted that they're gonna do the JavaScript as a template language for AppSync. I can't wait to see that happen. So many people just complain about the AppSync and VTO because they look at VTO.
What I love about VTL is when I chat to a developer who's potentially in my age group, with a bit of gray hair, and they start talking, about GraphQL, and it's like, oh, what does it work? How does AppSync work? And I go like, no, you use VTL to describe your resolvers. And I go, VTL, what's VTL? And I go, velocity template language. And they go, what? It's like that thing I used 20 years ago. Because their brains are so disconnected that VTL still exists, that people are still using this, and new people are adopting it. It's like they just don't seem to understand. It's like there's a short circuit going, we're still using what? Like VTL's alive? It hasn't died? That's one of the things. I think, JavaScript, I'd love to see WebAssembly as a resolver language. I don't think it's going to happen. Oh, not in the next 2-3 years, but I think WebAssembly might provide a good option. WebAssembly has a whole lot of issues around tool chains and maturity to overcome, but that might be a nice option, a bit more performant than JavaScript. But yeah, I think definitely a better resolver language would massively drive adoption there. What do you think? I think Bernard's keynotes the last couple of years, he doesn't do too many product announcements anymore. Like there was a point where he did a ton. Like it used to be Andy Jassy did all the business related announcements, and Werner did all the technical announcements. And it's not so much like Andy does some technical ones, and Werner does more, sometimes maybe more educational style. He talks about how they built Dynamo. Last year was for Zalia. He did a whole big talk about that, and then he had a customer come up and give it. It was Vanguard talk about their migration. Do you think he'll actually announce a lot of products? Like the biggest announcement he had last year was Builders Library, which was great. Big fan of that. But I don't think he's going to announce a lot. I think maybe 2 or 3 things. I don't know.
Yeah,
what are your
probably
thoughts?
not. I think you're right. Now that I think about it, they didn't announce anything last year. At least not in terms of new services or features. But yeah, and I saw the infrastructure keynote was yesterday as well. Also didn't nothing really happened there. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It just kind of came and went, and then it's like, okay, what did they just announce? I couldn't remember anything from that keynote. Yeah,
I think sometimes Amazon maybe needs to take a step back and sometimes say what are we trying to achieve with this keynote, and maybe be a little bit more upfront about it. So if you're going to infrastructure keynote, it's definitely going to be for people new to Amazon or understand a bit more about how the infrastructure works or the evolution of it. Because I know a few people who really enjoyed Peter DeSantis's famous talk from, I think was it 2016? It might be 2018, where he did that Monday night talk, and the in depth and Nitro and a few other things, and people were talking about the infrastructure keynote saying, that was more of a 101. We didn't really learn anything new. I think maybe they need to do a better job of setting expectations, and also maybe from themselves, don't have a keynote for the sake of having a keynote, because that does set expectations as well. Maybe it was probably interesting to a bunch of people, but folks have been using Amazon for years, and saw Peter DeSantis' previous talks, probably not that interesting. I was going to see, but there was a machine learning keynote the other day. Lots of SageMaker everywhere. I don't know if you.
Yeah, SageMaker is getting really big now. I'm getting quite confused by just looking at all the different things that starts with SageMaker. What do you make of all the things they're doing right now? I know I read Corey's post the other day about some of this, I guess, proliferation or massive sprawl of different services, especially for things that are, I guess, not super clear in terms of how they differ from each other. And I think one of the things that he brought up was SageMaker is supposed to be this nice, easy entry point for people that want to do machine learning on AWS. But now it's become this massive thing with so many different, again, like Lambda, so many different options. How do you know, which one do you use, and how do they all fit together? What do you think of all the different things that they're doing now within the SageMaker?
So I think SageMaker, I saw someone try and describe it as like the Visual Studio for machine learning. Like all these things they're calling SageMaker ultimately really are one product. And as Corey's mentioned, like Amazon's potentially doing a bit of a disservice by trying to brand these things as separate products, because they all work together. You don't just use like the SageMaker debugger on its own. You use it with Studio and you use it with all the other things. These aren't standalone products that you can use independently. They're all integrated, so they do potentially do a little bit of a disservice by hyping it up. But if you've got an opportunity to hype up your product, most people don't miss that. So it is confusing, but it does bring you like a lot of power. Like I did a contract last year at an organization where they'd spent 2 years building out an OpenStack cluster running OpenShift to get containers as a service to run Jupyter notebooks. And in my head, I'm going, you could go to any cloud provider and just get that as a service. And you probably just spend 6 months to a year getting compliance, doing some training, and you would have saved yourself a lot of money and be significantly further ahead. And SageMaker is, it's way more than just Jupyter notebooks as a service. It's kind of what was built 3-4 years ago, but they're adding so many features. Like Clarify is the big kind of anti-bias feature, which has a lot of issues because it's they're going to be very careful not to oversell it. But it's powerful. Lots of folks use it. Lots of folks in the service community use it for doing machine learning. But it's also one of these things like you and I look at it going, that's cool. We know people who use it now. So if I ever need any help with it, I'll go to Joe or Mark or whoever and say, come help me out, tell me what I need to do. I'm never going to become an expert in it. It's not. It's an interesting one. The only thing I can say about SageMaker, not new SageMaker, is Amazon's commitment to machine learning is very impressive. They've invested significant amounts of money, and there's a common theme of over multiple years is if you see anyone speaking publicly about machine learning at Amazon. So when they had a speaker talking about Clarify, she was the CTO of a computer recognition company that got acquired by Amazon. It was completely Black founded and funded a company out of Atlanta. Amazon acquired it and acquired it for the team and skills. And every year, typically, whenever there's a speak up, it's been an acquisition. Amazon's done a lot of acqui-hires in that machine learning space. And a lot of people don't realize, there's this new Amazon branded service. I was like, well, actually, if you look at what Amazon acquired a year, 2 or 3 years earlier, it's an evolution of whatever that thing is. And they've taken that thing completely, potentially, decomposed it, made it more Amazon-like, give it an Amazon flavor to it, and integrated it with the Amazon ecosystem, and then launched it. And that's one thing Amazon is very good at doing, is making acquisitions of small, interesting companies with great skills, and then leveraging that to take it to their market. And they do that definitely in machine learning very effectively, because every year there's someone new who, like a year ago, was working at some interesting machine learning company that you never heard of and got acquired before you ever heard of it, but now they're at Amazon. So I think that's going to carry on.
Came from that, right? Abstin was some I forgot the name of the company now.
That was Scaffold.
Scaffold, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Scaffold out of Y Combinator. Yeah,
right. And then the Elemental as well. Elemental, that whole suite of services was a different company.
IoT the same. IoT was telemetry, or the whole IoT suite was telemetry. Not the whole, but like the core of it. Yeah, so they get the core of a new service from some. Neptune was another one. People forget, like Amazon basically the only way Amazon maintain this cadence is by acquiring companies and acquiring people, because also hiring people can take time as well, hiring good people. So you acquire a company, you get 10, 20, 30 good people off the bat. So I think we're coming up to that.
There was actually one release that happened, I think, yesterday that I think it's probably worth a shout out. It's the VPC reachability analyzer.
Yeah, that was it.
That thing would have saved me so many hours and days of my life. Like trying to debug the packets being lost within that AWS networking takes a whole degree on its own.
I was going to say, when you see Amazon like launch these services that you would never use today, but you would definitely at some point in your life would have saved you a lot of hassle. They still keep improving in multiple ways, multiple areas that are no longer the fancy cool areas. EC2 has evolved, immensely since the last time I actually had to deploy a server. Which is good, because we're like the 1% of Amazon or 2% of Amazon's customers who are all in on serverless. We know a large percentage run serverless, but very few are all in. Apparently they do have other customers who use these things. Who knew? What's the other thing? They also there was a raft of Redshift and EMR announcements yesterday as well on Lake Formation, Apache Spark. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, so it's like new MySQL, Amazon RDS MySQL and Amazon Aurora MySQL databases can be data sources for federated querying with Redshift. So they've got Amazon Weather Forecast Index. If you don't want to go to the Dark Sky API anymore, actually maybe that's why, because Dark Sky API, I think Apple are going to close that down. So all these things that I don't touch Redshift. Athena all the way. This is one of those things. What else?
Yeah, quite a few new Redshift things, announcements.
Yeah. As Corey would tell you, Redshift are having their arse handed to them by Snowflake at the moment. So they need to catch up, and you probably can expect more. Actually, one product which has had no announcements, and I know a lot of people are hoping it will, is Cognito. What is happening there? What are your thoughts? It seems to have stagnated.
Yeah, I wish I know. It's well, I mean, for starters, I think they need to really work on the documentation side of things. It's so hard, even for like seasoned AWS users like ourselves, to get into Cognito, especially for some of the more advanced use cases. I had to set up the social sign-in a while back for a client of mine, and the documentation did not help at all. There was a couple of, click a button here, click a button there, but there's when you try to do it with the infrastructure as code, you had to kind of figure it out yourself. And then there was a couple of things that just flat out, they didn't talk about it. For example, how the sort of users are linked together. It only works if you have a user that creates an account by email first, and then they create their social accounts. That's the only way that those linking can work. And when they link the account, the first sign-in attempt fails. So you have to retry. That's just small cuts like that. They don't really talk about it. So when it comes to actually getting something up and running quickly, it's just much harder than it really needs to be. I really do wish they put more efforts into Cognito, making it easier to onboard, and also better documentations, and extend some of the features and fix some of the issues that people have as well.
Yeah, it's a service that a lot of people want to use. Authentication is something most apps require, and no one in their right mind really wants to build out their own authentication. So it's like, if you're on the Amazon stack, Cognito is the easy choice, and then they hit these problems, and they often end up building their own or going to Auth0 or Okta or a plethora of other companies. I was looking at the release stats. So they've only done 6 announcements this year that are not region related, like 6 feature announcements, and only 4 last year. So in the last 2 years, they've only added 10 new features, and
okay.
Yeah, and then, like, let's say 10 new features. So like April this year, not April, July this year, they added Apple sign-in on the social. They now support custom token expiration, which is a feature I would have thought they would have supported from day one. And I don't think the reInvent site is using the custom token expiration, because it really annoys me that you have to log in every day to watch videos. But yeah, it's the cadence is really, really low. Like you see when Amazon products kind of get a steam, they get going, and like the Redshift team is now, like the Lambda team and container teams are, they just have this cadence of release after release after release, and you're just not seeing it from Cognito. It's a massive missed opportunity. My thought.
Yeah, it's such a fundamental service that especially if you're using API gateway, using AppSync, Cognito is great for that user-facing authentication piece. And Auth0 is really expensive. Yeah,
we'll see. It's one of those things. So I think that's the hour. Do you have any questions? Half hour, Campbell. How are you doing? Corey wants to teach Dig to speak SQL. I hope, is Dig your dog? No, I'm joking. Who does DNS? We know Dig is Corey's database client. So, any other thoughts? Obviously you've got your production ready serverless course with us at Homeschool coming out in available from 18th of January. Starts 18th of January. You can go and buy, get access to it now. What do you think from the new features will you incorporate in that course that people actually find useful?
Let's see. So I'm not sure if there's anything in there that we will actually need to use as part of the core course material, but we're definitely going to cover them and mention them as options you can have. But yeah, I remember when I first started doing this workshop, it took me less than 20 minutes to explain the basic features of Lambda. Now I think that's closer to about an hour and a bit more. Just now, new features, that's probably going to be stretching out to hour and a half just to explain, hey, here are all the different features you can have Lambda.
Yeah, it's definitely, it'll be interesting. I think that's it. Let's hopefully Werner has some nice announcements about AppSync and better language support for resolvers. You can update your AppSync course, which is proving to be very, very popular. Hope that goes well. I think so if you are interested in learning from Jan or any of our other courses as well, we've got Vlad Ionescu, who I'll be chatting to next week about what's happening in the container space. He's an AWS container hero. He's running a containers and AWS course with us. So if you are using containers today and you need someplace to run your legacy workloads and your stateful apps, containers are a great solution for that. So Jan will talk about what's happening in that space, and he's got a course starting on the 11th. If you are want to get into serverless but you don't know Node.js, you don't have to know Node.js, but it's got the biggest ecosystem. You want to write serverless Node.js apps. I've got a course that'll be available from mid-January, which is free if you buy any of the other courses at this point in time, because it's still in beta. And that course is all about Node.js for serverless, aimed at developers from other languages who want to write serverless apps using Node.js. So it's you'll be horrified at the things Node.js does if you come from a more sane language. But it's great. We love it in the assignment. And last but not least, Slobodan Stojanovic and Alexander Simovic are running their testing serverless apps course. And that's going to have examples in Node.js and Python, and it's focusing on hexagonal architecture. So providing you a really good kind of standardized way to write very testable serverless applications, which is a good complement to all the other courses, and that starts in February. So that's it. Thanks for your time, Jan. Maybe let's catch up in January, and after everyone's had a break, and we've had time to think about these things and play with them. yeah, and see how it goes.
Sounds good. And I just heard earlier today that they're going to extend the reInvent into January. So
Yes,
let's see about that.
More reInvent. That's what everyone wants.
Yeah.
More reInvent. Give us more reInvent. Okay. Awesome, man.
Cool.
Goodbye, everyone.
Take it easy.
Goodbye,
Bye-bye.
Corey.